Hey there! Grab yourself a coffee and enjoy the story. The bathroom light flickered overhead as Natalie stared at the two pink lines on the pregnancy test. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a joy so intense it bordered on disbelief. Ryan would be ecstatic. After 13 months of marriage and 2 years of dating before that, they were finally going to be parents. She imagined his face, those expressive brown eyes widening, that boyish smile breaking across his features. Ryan had always talked about having children, about being the kind of father his own had never been. She pressed her palm against her still flat stomach and whispered a promise to the tiny life growing within her. That evening, when Ryan returned from work at the investment firm where he'd been steadily climbing the corporate ladder, Natalie had prepared his favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables. She'd set the table with their wedding china, lit candles, and even put on the navy blue dress he loved. The pregnancy test was wrapped in a small box beside his plate. "What's all this?" Ryan asked, loosening his tie as he entered their dining room. His eyes, though tired from a long day of analyzing market trends and advising clients, sparkled with curiosity. "Can't a wife just want to do something special for her husband?" Natalie replied, pouring him a glass of the sparkling cider she'd bought, instead of their usual wine. Throughout dinner, Natalie could barely contain herself. She picked at her food, her appetite overwhelmed by anticipation. When Ryan finally opened the small box and saw the pregnancy test, time seemed to stand still. He looked at it, then at her, his expression transforming from confusion to comprehension to pure, unfiltered joy. "We're having a baby?" he whispered, his voice catching. Natalie nodded, tears welling in her eyes. 8 weeks, according to my calculations. I have a doctor's appointment next Wednesday to confirm." Ryan was around the table in an instant, lifting her from her chair and spinning her in circles until they were both laughing and crying at once. That night, as they lay in bed, Ryan's hand rested protectively over her stomach, and he whispered plans for their future: camping trips to the mountains, teaching their child to ride a bike, building a treehouse in the backyard of the home they would buy once he received his next promotion. "Boy or girl, I don't care," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just want them to know how loved they are, every single day." The next few months were a whirlwind of joy. Ryan accompanied Natalie to every appointment, holding her hand as they heard their baby's heartbeat for the first time. He downloaded pregnancy apps on his phone, faithfully reading each week's update on their baby's development. "She's the size of a lime now," he'd announce proudly, or, "This week, she can hear our voices." He was convinced they were having a girl, though they'd decided to wait until birth to find out. Ryan transformed their spare bedroom into a nursery, spending weekends painting the walls a soft mint green and assembling furniture. He'd come home from work with tiny stuffed animals or children's books, each one accompanied by a story about how he couldn't resist when he saw it during his lunch break. His colleagues at the firm had thrown him a congratulatory happy hour, presenting him with a onesie embroidered with "Future Financial Analyst." When Natalie reached her 4th month of pregnancy, Ryan surprised her with a weekend getaway to a coastal bed and breakfast. They walked along the shoreline at sunset, making plans and dreaming about their future as a family of 3. Ryan seemed more attentive than ever, massaging her feet when they ached, making midnight runs for the strawberry ice cream she suddenly craved, and reading pregnancy books to understand what she was experiencing. "You're going to be the best father," Natalie told him as they watched the waves crash against the shore. "Our baby is so lucky to have you." Ryan squeezed her hand. "I'm the lucky one. I have everything I've ever wanted right here." It was during her 5th month of pregnancy when Natalie first noticed the change. It began subtly. Ryan coming home later than usual, his usual enthusiastic kisses replaced with distracted pecks on her cheek. When she asked about his day at work, his answers became vague, almost rehearsed. "The usual," he'd say, or "nothing special. Gone were the animated stories about difficult clients or successful investment strategies. At first, Natalie attributed his behavior to stress. His firm was undergoing a restructuring, and Ryan had mentioned concerns about how it might affect his position. She tried to be understanding, giving him space when he seemed distant, and comfort when he appeared troubled. But as days turned into weeks, the distance between them grew. One evening, as Natalie set the table for dinner, she realized Ryan hadn't mentioned the baby in days. No more updates about size comparisons to fruit, no more gentle touches to her growing belly, no more whispered conversations with their unborn child. When he arrived home that night, his shirt was wrinkled in a way that seemed odd for someone who had spent the day in an office, and there was a faint smell on his clothes that she couldn't quite place. Not cologne or perfume, but something unfamiliar. "How was your day?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light as she served the pasta she'd prepared. "Fine," he replied, not meeting her eyes. He ate quickly, complimenting the meal, but in a way that felt obligatory rather than genuine. "I felt the baby kick today," Natalie said, hoping to spark his interest. "It was like little butterfly wings fluttering inside me." Ryan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's great," he said, and then immediately changed the subject to something he'd supposedly heard on the radio during his commute home. That night, lying beside him in bed, Natalie felt a heaviness in her chest that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. Ryan, who once couldn't fall asleep without his arm draped protectively around her, now lay facing away from her, his breathing shallow in a way that told her he was only pretending to be asleep. The next morning, Natalie watched through a gap in the curtains as Ryan left for work. He adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror of his car, a gesture so normal, so consistent with the man she'd married. Yet, something felt wrong. The Ryan who pulled out of their driveway in his sensible sedan, briefcase on the passenger seat, was becoming a stranger to her. Later that week, while sorting laundry, Natalie found one of Ryan's dress shirts with what appeared to be a small stain on the collar. As she pre-treated it, she noticed the fabric smelled clean, as if it had already been washed. Puzzled, she checked several other items in the hamper and found the same thing: clothes that appeared worn but smelled freshly laundered. Why would Ryan put clean clothes in the hamper? And who had washed them? Her stomach clenched with a new kind of discomfort, one that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. That night, after Ryan had gone to bed claiming exhaustion, Natalie sat alone in their living room, her hands resting on her belly as their baby kicked inside her. For the first time since seeing those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, she felt truly alone. "What's happening to us?" she whispered to the silent room, a question for which she had no answer but was becoming increasingly determined to find out. She thought about the early days of their relationship, how open and honest they had been with each other. She thought about their wedding day, when Ryan had vowed to share everything with her, the good and the bad, the joys and the burdens. Where had that man gone? And who was this stranger who wore his face but kept secrets behind his eyes? As the baby kicked again, stronger this time, Natalie made a decision. For the sake of their child, for the future they had planned together, she would discover what Ryan was hiding, even if the truth might break her heart. The following morning, Natalie woke to an empty bed. The digital clock on her nightstand read 6:15, and the sound of the shower running told her that Ryan was already preparing for work. She lay there, one hand resting on her growing belly, staring at the ceiling as she contemplated her next move. The baby stirred within her, a gentle reminder of what was at stake. When Ryan emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist and hair still damp, Natalie pretended to be asleep. Through barely open eyes, she watched him dress with the efficient movements of someone following a long-established routine. Navy suit, light blue shirt, the striped tie she had given him for his birthday last year. He paused briefly before the mirror, adjusting his collar and smoothing his hair. There was something mechanical about his movements, as if he were an actor playing the role of successful businessman, rather than actually being one. Before leaving the bedroom, Ryan approached the bed. For a moment, Natalie thought he might lean down to kiss her goodbye, as he had done every morning for the first 3 years of their relationship. Instead, he simply stood there, looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher, then quietly left the room. Minutes later, she heard the front door close and his car start in the driveway. Only then did she allow herself to release the breath she'd been holding. After forcing herself to eat a small breakfast for the baby's sake, Natalie sat at their kitchen table with a notepad, listing the changes she had observed in Ryan over the past few weeks. Arriving home later than usual, vague answers about his workday, the mysterious clean but in the hamper clothes, his emotional withdrawal from both her and their unborn child. Each item on its own might have a simple explanation, but together they formed a pattern that made her heart race with anxiety. "There has to be a logical explanation," she whispered to herself, rubbing her belly as the baby kicked in response to her elevated heart rate. Ryan wouldn't. She couldn't even complete the thought. The idea that her husband, the man who had once looked at her with such transparent adoration, could be betraying her was almost physically painful to consider. Yet what other explanation could there be? The word affair floated in her mind like a malevolent specter, unwelcome but impossible to banish. She thought of TV shows and movies where the unfaithful spouse exhibited exactly these behaviors: the emotional distance, the unexplained absences, the secretive phone habits. Speaking of phones, Natalie realized she had never done something she had always considered a violation of trust: check Ryan's phone. Before his behavior changed, she would have dismissed the idea immediately. They had always respected each other's privacy, but these were extraordinary circumstances, and she needed answers. Ryan's personal phone was with him at work, but his work tablet was still charging on his desk in their home office. Natalie hesitated only briefly before entering the room they had once shared as a workspace, before converting the second bedroom into a nursery. Ryan's desk was meticulously organized, just as it had always been. Financial journals stacked neatly beside his computer, a photo of their wedding day in a silver frame, his tablet connected to the charger. With trembling fingers, Natalie picked up the tablet. To her surprise, it wasn't locked, another departure from Ryan's usual cautiousness about work-related information. She opened his email application, expecting to find hundreds of professional correspondences about market trends and investment opportunities. Instead, she found an almost empty inbox with only a handful of messages, most of them automated notifications or newsletters. The most recent work-related email was dated almost 2 months ago. "That can't be right," Natalie murmured, scrolling down to check if she had missed something. 2 months with no work emails? For someone in Ryan's position, that was impossible. She checked his calendar next and found it completely empty. No meetings, no client appointments, nothing. A cold sensation spread through her chest as she set the tablet down. Either Ryan had completely stopped using his work devices, or he was no longer working at the investment firm. Both possibilities filled her with dread, but for different reasons. Natalie spent the rest of the morning in a daze, moving through household tasks while her mind raced with possibilities. If Ryan had lost his job, why wouldn't he tell her? They had always been honest with each other about everything. And if he wasn't going to work each day, where was he going? Who was he with? By mid-afternoon, Natalie had made a decision. Tomorrow, she would follow Ryan. The thought made her stomach churn with guilt, but she saw no alternative. Their marriage, their future, their family, everything depended on knowing the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That evening, when Ryan returned home, Natalie studied him with new eyes. His suit was as immaculate as always, his briefcase in hand, his expression carefully neutral. How had she not noticed before how deliberate his performance was? How practiced his questions about her day seemed. "How are you feeling?" he asked as they ate the takeout he had brought home. "Any new developments with the baby?" "The doctor says everything is progressing normally," Natalie replied, watching his face for any genuine reaction. She mentioned we might be able to schedule a 3-dimensional ultrasound next month if we want to. That's good, Ryan said, nodding slightly. Just a few months ago, he would have been enthusiastic about the possibility of seeing their baby's face before birth. Now, he merely took another bite of his food, his eyes fixed on his plate. "Ryan," Natalie said suddenly, unable to maintain the pretense any longer. "Is everything okay? With us, I mean." He looked up, and for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Pain, guilt, fear, she couldn't tell which. "Of course," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Why wouldn't it be? You seem distant lately, like you're somewhere else even when you're right here with me." Ryan set down his fork and reached across the table to take her hand. His palm was cool against hers, his wedding ring catching the light. "I'm sorry if I've been distracted. Work has been demanding, but I'm here, Nat. I promise." The lie, because she was now certain it was a lie, hung between them like an invisible wall. Natalie nodded, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "I understand. I just miss you, that's all." "I miss you too," he said, and for the first time in weeks, his voice carried a note of genuine emotion. For a second, Natalie saw a glimpse of the man she had married, before his expression closed again, and he withdrew his hand to resume eating. That night, as they prepared for bed, Natalie noticed Ryan checking his phone more frequently than usual. When she emerged from the bathroom after her shower, she caught him quickly putting the device down on his nightstand, screen facing down. "Important work email?" she asked casually, applying lotion to her arms. "Just checking the weather for tomorrow," he replied too quickly. "Might rain in the afternoon." Another lie. Natalie felt each one like a physical blow, chipping away at the foundation of trust their relationship had been built upon. Sleep eluded her that night. She lay awake, listening to Ryan's breathing beside her, wondering how they had reached this point. When had the secrets begun? What had triggered his withdrawal? Most importantly, what would she discover when she followed him tomorrow? Morning arrived, after what felt like an eternity. Ryan followed his usual routine: shower, dress, a quick breakfast of toast and coffee. Natalie feigned a headache, telling him she would rest at home rather than run the errands she had planned. He pressed a perfunctory kiss to her forehead, told her to feel better, and left at precisely 7:30, just as he did every weekday. Natalie waited exactly 15 minutes before grabbing her purse and car keys. Her heart pounded as she backed out of their driveway, feeling like a character in one of those suspense novels she enjoyed reading before bed. Except this wasn't fiction. This was her life, her marriage, her future hanging in the balance. She had installed a location-sharing app on both their phones when they first moved in together, primarily as a safety measure. They had joked about it at the time. "Now you'll know if I'm really working late or secretly meeting my bowling league," Ryan had teased. The memory made her chest ache as she opened the app now, watching the little blue dot that represented her husband's phone moving steadily away from their suburban neighborhood. To her surprise, Ryan wasn't heading toward the financial district where his firm was located. Instead, he was driving in the opposite direction, toward an industrial area on the outskirts of town. Natalie followed at a safe distance, grateful that Ryan's silver sedan was common enough to blend into traffic. After about 20 minutes, Ryan's dot stopped moving. Natalie navigated carefully, not wanting to drive past him accidentally. She parked on a side street and walked the remaining distance, her heart in her throat. When she turned the corner, she spotted Ryan's car parked outside what appeared to be a construction site. Workers in hard hats and safety vests moved about, carrying materials and operating machinery. Natalie stood frozen, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Why would Ryan be at a construction site? Then she saw him, and the ground seemed to drop from beneath her feet. Ryan, her Ryan, emerged from a small trailer office, no longer wearing his business suit but dressed in worn jeans, work boots, and a faded t-shirt. A yellow hard hat covered his neatly styled hair, and work gloves protruded from his back pocket. Without hesitation, he joined a group of men lifting wooden beams from a truck. his movements suggesting this was far from his first day on the job. Natalie pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her investment analyst husband was working construction. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He had lost his job. He must have, and instead of telling her, he had created this elaborate deception, maintaining the illusion of his white-collar career while secretly doing manual labor. But why? Why the deception? Why not tell her the truth? They were partners. They had vowed to face life's challenges together. Did he think she would love him less if he wasn't the successful financial analyst she had married? Did he not trust her to stand by him through hardship? Tears blurred her vision as she watched Ryan work, his face set in concentration as he carried heavy materials across the site. His hands, which she had only ever known to be smooth and manicured, were now clearly calloused and roughened. How long had this been going on? The question echoed in her mind as she turned away, unable to watch any longer. Back in her car, Natalie sat with her hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what she had discovered. This explained some things: the late hours, the physical exhaustion, the vague answers about his day. But it didn't explain everything. The mysteriously clean clothes, his emotional withdrawal, and who was he texting last night? A new, troubling thought occurred to her. What if the construction job wasn't the only secret Ryan was keeping? What if there was someone else? Someone who knew the truth about his employment situation when she didn't? The baby kicked sharply, as if sensing her distress. Natalie took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring the baby or herself. "We're going to figure this out." See, she still had more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. She needed to know the whole truth, no matter how painful it might be. With renewed determination, she started her car. Ryan would be at the construction site all day, according to the pattern of behavior she had observed. That gave her time for the next step in her investigation, finding out where he went after work and who he might be meeting. The digital dashboard clock in Natalie's car read 3:37 in the afternoon as she parked near the construction site again, positioning her vehicle where she could observe without being easily spotted. She had spent the day in a state of emotional turbulence, alternating between anger at Ryan's deception, hurt at his lack of trust in her, and confusion about what other secrets he might be keeping. After witnessing Ryan working construction that morning, she had driven home in a daze, her mind racing with questions. She had called her office to extend her time off, claiming pregnancy complications that required rest. The lie had tasted bitter on her tongue, but she needed the freedom to untangle the web of deception that had ensnared her marriage. Back at home, she had searched for clues she might have missed. In Ryan's closet, behind his neatly arranged suits, she discovered a gym bag containing worn work clothes, jeans with paint stains, t-shirts that smelled of sawdust and sweat, heavy boots caked with dried mud, physical evidence of his secret life. In the pocket of one pair of jeans, she found a crumpled pay stub from Davidson Construction. The amount was less than half of what Ryan used to make at the investment firm. The date on the stub confirmed what she had suspected. He had been working there for approximately 7 weeks, almost 2 months of daily deception. Now, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the construction site, Natalie watched workers beginning to pack up for the day. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had barely eaten since breakfast, but food was the last thing on her mind. She placed a protective hand over her belly, silently apologizing to her baby for the stress they were both enduring. "Just a little longer," she whispered. "We need to know the truth." At precisely 4:15, Ryan emerged from the site with a group of other workers. He had changed back into his business clothes, the perfect disguise for returning home, maintaining the illusion that he had spent the day in an office rather than hauling construction materials. The transformation was so complete that if Natalie hadn't seen him in work clothes earlier, she would never have suspected he had spent the day doing manual labor. She ducked down as Ryan's car passed her, then carefully pulled into traffic to follow him. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Where was he going now? Home to her? Or somewhere else? To someone else? To her surprise, Ryan didn't take the route home. Instead, he drove to a small strip mall about 20 minutes from their neighborhood. Natalie parked at a safe distance and watched as he entered what appeared to be a laundromat. 15 minutes later, he emerged with a small bundle that he placed in his trunk before driving away. That explained the mysteriously clean clothes in the hamper. He was having them professionally laundered to hide the evidence of his construction work. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. But Natalie still felt there was more to discover. She followed Ryan again, expecting him to head home now. Instead, he drove to a modest restaurant in an area of town they rarely visited. Natalie's throat tightened as she watched him park and check his appearance in the rearview mirror before exiting his car. Was this it? Was he meeting someone? With trembling hands, she texted their neighbor, Susan, asking her to check if any packages had been delivered to their doorstep. A flimsy excuse to confirm whether Ryan had told anyone she was out. Susan's reply came quickly. No packages, but Ryan just called asking if I'd seen you come home. Said you weren't answering your phone. Told him you mentioned doctor's appointment. Hope everything's okay. Natalie's blood ran cold. Ryan was checking on her whereabouts. He suspected she might be following him, or at least that she wasn't where she had claimed to be. The realization added a new layer of complexity to the situation. If he was concerned about her discovering his construction job, why not just come clean? Unless there was something more, something worse, that he was hiding. Through the restaurant's large front windows, Natalie could see Ryan speaking to a hostess, who led him toward the back of the establishment. From her position, she couldn't see where they went, or who might be waiting for him. The uncertainty was unbearable. After sitting in her car for 10 agonizing minutes, Natalie made a decision. She needed to see for herself. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, she applied a fresh coat of lipstick, straightened her maternity blouse, and stepped out of her car. The restaurant was busier than it had appeared from outside, with the dinner rush just beginning. Natalie approached the hostess stand, one hand resting protectively on her visible baby bump. "Table for one?" the young hostess asked, with a practiced smile. "Actually," Natalie said, her voice remarkably steady despite her inner turmoil, "I'm meeting someone. I think he just arrived a few minutes ago. Tall man in a navy suit." The hostess nodded. "Oh, you must be with the manager interview. They're in the back office. Through those doors and to the left." Manager interview? Confusion momentarily displaced Natalie's anxiety. Before she could process this information, a woman emerged from the back hallway. Attractive, professionally dressed, perhaps in her early 40s. Natalie instinctively stepped behind a decorative plant, her heart racing. The woman approached the hostess stand. "Sarah, when Mr. Adams is done filling out the paperwork, please show him to the main dining room. I want to introduce him to the evening staff before we continue the interview." "Yes, Ms. Johnson," the hostess replied. Natalie's mind raced. Mr. Adams, Ryan, was interviewing for a management position? Was this restaurant job a step up from construction? Another secret employment he was hiding from her? Or was this interview a cover for something else entirely? Before she could decide what to do next, Ryan himself appeared in the hallway, following the woman, Ms. Johnson, apparently, into the main dining area. Natalie quickly turned away, pretending to study the menu posted by the entrance. From the corner of her eye, she watched as Ryan was introduced to several servers and kitchen staff. His demeanor was professional, confident, reminiscent of how he had been at the investment firm. There was nothing in his manner to suggest anything inappropriate between him and Ms. Johnson. As they moved toward the bar area, Natalie slipped out of the restaurant, her emotions in turmoil. Construction worker by day, restaurant manager candidate by evening, Ryan was living a double life that grew more complex by the hour. But why? What had happened at the investment firm that had set this chain of deception in motion? Back in her car, Natalie checked her phone to find 3 missed calls from Ryan, and a text. Hope you're feeling better. Stopping to pick up dinner on my way home. Love you. The casual love you at the end of the message struck her like a physical blow. How could he profess love while building such elaborate lies? The Ryan she thought she knew would never have deceived her this way. The man she had married had been honest to a fault, often to his own detriment. What had changed him? As she watched Ryan exit the restaurant 45 minutes later, shaking hands with Ms. Johnson before getting into his car, another piece of the text message registered. He was bringing dinner home, maintaining the routine, the facade of normalcy. Would he tell her about the restaurant interview? Or would it become just another secret in the growing collection he kept from her? Natalie decided not to follow him home. She needed time to think, to process everything she had discovered. She drove to a quiet park near their neighborhood, parked beneath a sprawling oak tree, and finally allowed herself to break down. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, her body shaking with silent sobs. How had they reached this point? When had communication and trust, the foundations of their relationship, crumbled so completely? The irony wasn't lost on her. As their baby grew within her, creating a physical connection between them, the emotional bonds of their marriage were disintegrating. Through her tears, Natalie caught sight of her reflection in the rearview mirror. Eyes red-rimmed, mascara smudged, cheeks blotchy. She barely recognized herself. Pregnancy had already changed her body in ways that sometimes made her feel like a stranger in her own skin. Now, the emotional toll of Ryan's deception was transforming her further, turning her into someone she never thought she'd be. A wife who spied on her husband, who followed him, who doubted his every word. The baby kicked forcefully, as if protesting her distress. Natalie placed both hands on her rounded belly, taking deep breaths to calm herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her unborn child. "I'm trying to figure this out for both of us." By the time she pulled into their driveway, darkness had fallen. Ryan's car was already there, the lights in their kitchen glowing warmly through the windows. For a moment, Natalie sat in her car, gathering her courage. Should she confront him with what she knew? Or should she wait, continue her investigation until she had the complete picture? The decision was made for her when the front door opened and Ryan stepped onto the porch, concern evident in his posture. He had changed into casual clothes, jeans and a soft gray sweater she had given him last Christmas. In that moment, he looked so much like the man she had fallen in love with that her resolve nearly crumbled. "Nat," he called, approaching her car. "Are you okay? I've been worried sick." She stepped out, forcing a smile that felt like it might shatter her face. "Sorry, I turned my phone off during my nap and then decided to get some fresh air. Lost track of time." Ryan's relief was palpable and seemingly genuine. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "Don't scare me like that," he murmured against her hair. "With the baby and everything, I was about to call the hospitals." The concern in his voice, the protective way he held her, how could this be the same man who had been systematically lying to her for weeks? The contradiction made her head spin. Inside, Ryan had set the table with their everyday dishes, cartons of Chinese food arranged in the center. The normalcy of the scene, a weeknight dinner, just the two of them, felt surreal after the day's revelations. "How was your day?" Natalie asked as they sat down to eat. The question laden with meaning he couldn't possibly understand. Ryan hesitated just a fraction of a second before answering. "Busy. The Jefferson account is taking up most of my time these days." Another lie. The Jefferson account, like Ryan's position at the investment firm, no longer existed. Natalie nodded, playing along as she had for weeks without realizing it. "And yours?" he asked, passing her the container of steamed vegetables. "Feeling any better?" "Much," she lied in return, the irony of their mutual deception not lost on her. "The headache is gone. I think I just needed to rest." They ate in relative silence, the usual comfortable companionship replaced by an undercurrent of tension that Ryan seemed oblivious to. but that Natalie felt in every fiber of her being. She watched him closely, searching for signs of the stranger he had become, the construction worker, the restaurant manager applicant, the husband who maintained an elaborate fiction rather than confiding in his wife. As Ryan gathered their empty containers, he mentioned casually, "I may be late tomorrow. Quarterly review meeting." Natalie nodded, her throat tight. Would he be at the construction site again? Or the restaurant? Or somewhere else entirely? Somewhere she hadn't discovered yet? Later, as they prepared for bed, Natalie caught Ryan checking his phone again, his body angled away from her as he typed a response to someone. When he noticed her watching, he quickly put the phone down. "Just wrapping up some work emails," he explained with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Natalie smiled back, the expression feeling foreign on her face. Of course. As they lay in bed that night, Ryan fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and even. Natalie remained awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. The man sleeping beside her was simultaneously her husband and a stranger, familiar and unknown. Tomorrow, she decided, would be the final chapter in her investigation. She would follow him again, from morning until night if necessary, until she had uncovered every secret, every lie. Only then could she decide what their future held, if they even had a future together. With that resolution, Natalie finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, one hand resting protectively over her belly, the other clutching the edge of the mattress, as if afraid she might fall from some great height. In her dreams, she searched endlessly for Ryan through a maze of construction sites and restaurants, always glimpsing him just as he disappeared around another corner, his voice echoing back to her. "I'm here, Nat, I promise." But promises, she had learned, could be as insubstantial as morning fog, disappearing with the harsh light of reality. The shrill beep of an alarm cut through the pre-dawn darkness. Natalie was already awake, had been for hours, watching the digital numbers on the clock change minute by minute. Beside her, Ryan stirred, reaching out to silence the alarm before it could sound again. For a moment, he lay motionless, and Natalie could sense him gathering his energy for the day ahead, a day of physical labor that his body was still adjusting to after years behind a desk. "Morning," he murmured, turning to place a kiss on her forehead. His eyes were still heavy with sleep, his voice rough. In these brief moments between dreaming and fully waking, he seemed most like the Ryan she had married, unguarded, genuine. "Morning," she replied, studying his face in the dim light filtering through their curtains. "Sleep well?" "Like a rock." He sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "How about you?" Natalie considered lying, then decided against it. Small truths felt important amid the larger deceptions. Not really. The baby was doing somersaults all night. Ryan's hand moved to her belly, a spontaneous gesture that surprised her after weeks of emotional distance. The baby kicked against his palm, and his face transformed with wonder. "Strong little athlete we've got in there." For a fleeting moment, they were just a husband and wife expecting their first child, sharing the miracle of new life. Then Ryan's expression changed, a shadow crossing his features as reality seemed to reassert itself. He withdrew his hand and stood, stretching muscles that were undoubtedly sore from unaccustomed physical work. "I should get ready," he said, no longer meeting her eyes. "Big day ahead." As he disappeared into the bathroom, Natalie lay back against her pillows, contemplating the brief connection they had just shared. It confirmed what she had suspected. The real Ryan, the man she had fallen in love with, was still there beneath the layers of deception. But something was keeping him trapped in this web of lies, something powerful enough to override the honesty and openness that had once been the cornerstone of their relationship. Today, she promised herself, she would discover what that something was. Ryan followed his now familiar morning routine. Shower, dress in his business attire, quick breakfast while scanning the news on his tablet. He kissed her goodbye at 7:30 precisely. briefcase in hand, the perfect image of a financial professional heading to the office. Natalie waited 15 minutes before getting up, dressing quickly in comfortable clothes that wouldn't restrict her movement or draw attention. She chose a loose-fitting dress that somewhat camouflaged her pregnancy, paired with a light jacket and sunglasses. Her stomach churned with a mixture of determination and dread as she picked up her car keys, preparing for what might be the most important day of her marriage. As before, she used the location-sharing app to track Ryan's movements. The familiar route to the construction site appeared on her screen, the little blue dot moving steadily. But today, she wouldn't just observe from a distance. Today, she would understand everything, no matter how painful the truth might be. She parked near the construction site, choosing a different location than yesterday to avoid being recognized. From her vantage point, she could see Ryan's car in the small gravel lot designated for workers. Through her car window, she watched as he emerged from the site's office trailer, now dressed in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, hard hat in place, tool belt around his waist. The transformation was jarring, from polished investment analyst to construction worker in under an hour. What struck her most was how comfortable he seemed in this role. There was no hesitation in his movements as he joined a team lifting heavy beams, no uncertainty as he followed instructions from the foreman. This wasn't his first week on the job. He had adapted, developed skills, earned the respect of his co-workers, all while maintaining the fiction of his white-collar career at home. Natalie spent the morning watching, processing, trying to reconcile the man she saw working in the hot sun with the husband who left their house each day in a pressed suit. Around noon, she drove to a nearby cafe, needing a break from the emotional surveillance and something to satisfy her growing hunger. The baby seemed particularly active today, perhaps responding to her elevated stress levels. As she sat with her sandwich and decaffeinated tea, Natalie scrolled through photos on her phone, images of her and Ryan from happier times. Their honeymoon in Hawaii, his arms wrapped around her as they watched the sunset. The day they moved into their house, both of them paint-splattered and exhausted but exhilarated. The night they had celebrated his promotion at the investment firm, his eyes shining with pride and ambition. When had it all changed? What catastrophic event had transformed her honest, open husband into a man living a double life? A new thought occurred to her as she studied a recent photo taken at their baby shower just 2 months ago. Ryan was smiling in the image, one hand protectively placed on her barely visible bump, the other arm around her shoulders. His smile reached his eyes then, genuine, unforced. That was before the change, before the lies began. The timing suddenly seemed significant. Their baby shower had been in early February. Ryan's behavior had shifted in early March, almost exactly 2 months ago. What had happened during that time frame? Natalie closed her eyes, mentally reviewing everything she could remember from that period. Ryan had been excited about a major client presentation. There had been talk of another promotion, possibly a partnership track. Then suddenly, he had become withdrawn, mentioning restructuring at the firm, speaking vaguely about changes that might affect his position. She had assumed it was temporary stress, never imagining he had actually lost his job. But why? Ryan was excellent at what he did, meticulous, insightful, trusted by clients and colleagues alike. What could have possibly led to his dismissal? And more importantly, why hadn't he told her? The questions multiplied as Natalie returned to her surveillance position near the construction site. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she could see Ryan and his co-workers pausing frequently for water breaks, wiping sweat from their brows. The physical toll of the work was evident in Ryan's posture, shoulders slightly hunched, movements becoming more measured as fatigue set in. At 4:15, just as yesterday, the workday ended. Natalie watched as Ryan disappeared into the trailer, emerging 20 minutes later in his business clothes, all evidence of his labor carefully concealed. There was something profoundly sad about the transformation, about the effort he expended to maintain the illusion of a life that no longer existed. She followed him again, expecting him to return to the restaurant for his second interview. Instead, he drove to a small medical clinic in a professional complex she didn't recognize. Natalie parked across the street, confusion adding to her emotional turmoil. Was Ryan ill? Was there a medical reason behind his behavior that she didn't know about? He remained inside for approximately 40 minutes. When he emerged, his expression was unreadable as he returned to his car. Natalie's heart pounded as she followed him once more, the possibilities multiplying in her mind. What else didn't she know about her husband's life? To her surprise, Ryan's next stop was a flower shop. Through the large front window, she watched as he carefully selected a bouquet of pink and white roses, her favorites. The sight brought tears to her eyes. Who were the flowers for? Her? Or someone else? Her question was answered when Ryan's next destination was their home. Natalie remained in her car down the street, watching as he carried the flowers and what appeared to be takeout bags into the house. He was preparing for a normal evening at home, perhaps trying to make amends for his recent emotional distance without revealing its true cause. The realization crystallized her resolve. Tonight, this pattern of deception would end. She would confront Ryan with what she knew, demand the complete truth, and decide where they went from there. Their child deserved parents who communicated honestly, who faced challenges together rather than apart. Natalie drove around the block, giving herself time to compose her thoughts. When she finally pulled into their driveway, her hands were steady on the steering wheel, her decision made. Whatever Ryan was hiding, whatever had driven him to create this elaborate fiction, they would face it together. Or they would not face it at all. Inside, the house smelled of her favorite Italian restaurant. The dining room table was set with their good dishes, candles waiting to be lit, the bouquet of roses arranged in a crystal vase at the center. Ryan emerged from the kitchen, a dish towel over his shoulder, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "There you are," he said, crossing to kiss her cheek. I was starting to worry. "Were you?" Natalie asked, her voice calmer than she felt. "You seem to worry a lot about my whereabouts lately." Something flickered in Ryan's eyes. Caution, perhaps, or the first hint of realization that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "What do you mean? You called Susan yesterday to check if I was home. You've been texting more frequently asking where I am, when I'll be back." Natalie set her purse down deliberately. "It's almost as if you're afraid I might discover something you don't want me to know." Ryan's expression shifted, the warm welcome replaced by wariness. "Nat, what's going on? You're acting strange." "I'm acting strange?" A short, incredulous laugh escaped her. "That's rich coming from the man who's been living a double life for the past 2 months." The color drained from Ryan's face. He took a step back, as if physically struck by her words. "What are you talking about?" "I know, Ryan." Natalie's voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "I know you're not going to the investment firm every day. I know you're working construction. I know you interviewed at a restaurant yesterday. What I don't know is why you've been lying to me about all of it." For a moment, Ryan stood frozen, his expression a complex mixture of shock, shame, and what looked like relief. The mask he had worn for weeks finally slipped away, revealing the exhausted, conflicted man beneath. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I suspected something was wrong for weeks. I confirmed it yesterday when I followed you." Natalie crossed her arms protectively over her belly. "What happened, Ryan? What was so terrible that you couldn't tell me the truth?" Ryan sank into a dining chair, running his hands over his face. When he looked up, his eyes were damp. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Natalie repeated, incredulous. "By lying to me every day? By shutting me out when I needed you most? You don't understand," Ryan said, a note of desperation in his voice. "They fired me, Nat. Not just fired. They accused me of fraud. They said I manipulated client accounts for personal gain. The revelation hit Natalie like a physical blow. Fraud. But you would never. Of course I didn't, Ryan interrupted, suddenly animated. It was Harrington. He was the one skimming from accounts. But when compliance started investigating, he planted evidence pointing to me. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. They had already made their decision. Natalie slowly lowered herself into the chair opposite him, processing this new information. Why didn't you fight it? Get a lawyer? With what money? Ryan's laugh was bitter. Harrington was a senior partner. His word against mine, and he had covered his tracks perfectly. A legal battle would have drained our savings, put stress on you during your pregnancy, and I still might have lost. My reputation in the financial sector was ruined overnight. So instead, you decided to pretend nothing had happened? Natalie's voice rose with disbelief. To lie to me every single day? Ryan reached across the table, his hands seeking hers. After a moment's hesitation, she allowed the contact. You were just entering your second trimester. You were so happy, so excited about the baby. I couldn't bear to ruin that with news that would only cause you stress and worry. I thought I could fix it myself, by working construction and interviewing at restaurants without telling me. Despite her anger, Natalie felt the first stirrings of understanding. I took the construction job immediately. It was all I could find on short notice. The pay is terrible, but it's cash daily. Then I started applying for management positions at restaurants, hotels, anywhere that wouldn't require extensive background checks that might uncover the fraud allegations. His grip on her hands tightened. I was trying to maintain our lifestyle, to make sure you and the baby wouldn't suffer because of what happened to me. I thought once I had secured a better position, I could gradually tell you the truth. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture of a man driven by desperation and love to make terrible choices. But something still didn't make sense. What about the medical clinic today? And the clean clothes in the hamper? The late nights when you claimed to be working? Natalie pulled her hands away, needing physical distance to maintain her emotional clarity. Ryan's expression changed, a new layer of shame crossing his features. The clinic was for my back. Construction work. It's not exactly what my body is used to. I've been seeing a chiropractor twice a week just to be able to function. He paused, swallowing hard. The clothes. I've been taking them to a laundromat near the construction site. I couldn't let you see the dirt, the wear and tear that would give away what I was really doing. And the late nights? Sometimes second interviews at restaurants, sometimes extra shifts at the construction site when they needed the help, and sometimes he looked down, unable to meet her eyes, sometimes just driving around, trying to figure out how to fix the mess my life had become without burdening you with it. The room fell silent as Natalie absorbed everything Ryan had revealed. The truth was simultaneously better and worse than what she had feared. Not infidelity, but a different kind of betrayal, a fundamental breakdown of the partnership they had promised each other. You should have told me, she said finally, her voice soft but firm. We're supposed to be partners, Ryan. For better or worse, remember? How could you not trust me with this? It wasn't about trust, Ryan said, his voice breaking. It was about shame. I failed, Nat. I lost everything I had worked for. The career I built, the future I promised you. Gone in an instant because of someone else's crime. I couldn't face telling you that I wasn't the man you thought you married. As Natalie looked at her husband, truly looked at him for the first time in weeks, she saw the toll his deception had taken. Beneath the physical exhaustion from unaccustomed labor was a deeper weariness. The crushing weight of carrying a secret too heavy for one person to bear. The realization softened something in her chest, the anger giving way to a more complex emotion. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The man I married, Natalie said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes, isn't defined by his job title or his salary. The man I married is sitting right in front of me, someone who would work himself to exhaustion rather than let his family go without. Someone who would carry a burden alone if he thought it would protect the people he loves. Ryan looked up, surprise evident in his expression. Whatever response he had expected, this wasn't it. But, she continued, rising from her chair to move around the table, the man I married also promised to share his life with me, the struggles as well as the successes. When you shut me out, when you decided I couldn't handle the truth, you took away my choice to stand by you. You made me a spectator in our marriage rather than a partner. She stood beside him now, close enough to see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tension he carried in his shoulders. Without conscious thought, she reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the contours that had become both familiar and foreign during their weeks of emotional separation. "I'm so sorry, Nat," Ryan whispered, leaning into her touch. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was really protecting myself. I couldn't bear to see disappointment in your eyes. What you saw tonight, was that disappointment?" He held his gaze steadily. "Or was it hurt that you didn't trust me enough to share your burden?" Ryan closed his eyes, his hand coming up to cover hers. "I have made a mess of everything." "Not everything," Natalie said, guiding his free hand to her rounded belly where their child kicked against his palm. "Some things you got exactly right." That night, they talked until dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light through their kitchen windows. Ryan shared every detail. The moment he realized he was being framed, the humiliation of being escorted from the building, the panic when he calculated their financial situation. He described the physical toll of construction work on a body accustomed to office life, the blisters that had turned to calluses, the muscles that screamed in protest each morning. Natalie listened, really listened, occasionally asking questions, but mostly allowing him the catharsis of finally unburdening himself. When he finished, emotionally spent, but somehow lighter, she shared her side, the confusion, the fear, the terrible suspicions that had consumed her as his behavior changed. "I thought you were having an affair," she admitted, as the first birds began their morning songs outside. "When I found that text from Sarah Johnson about meeting on Friday night, I was certain of it." Ryan's expression shifted from exhaustion to horror. "God, Nat, never. You and the baby, you're everything to me. I would never betray you like that. I know that now," she said, squeezing his hand. "But can you understand why your secrecy led me there? Why the distance you created between us felt like the worst kind of rejection?" Understanding dawned in Ryan's eyes. "I was so focused on the practical problem, replacing my income, maintaining our lifestyle, that I didn't see what it was doing to us, to you." As morning light filled their kitchen, they faced the practical realities of their situation. Their savings would last another 3 months if they were careful. Ryan's construction job provided daily income, and the restaurant manager position, if he secured it, would offer stability, though at a significantly lower salary than his previous career. "We'll need to adjust our expectations," Natalie acknowledged, pragmatic now that the emotional storm had passed. "Maybe delay buying the house we talked about, cut back on non-essentials." "I can keep doing both jobs until the baby comes," Ryan offered, determination replacing the defeat that had shadowed his features for weeks. "Construction during the day, restaurant in the evenings. It's not ideal, but it would help us build our savings back up." Natalie shook her head firmly. "Not if it means I never see you. Not if it means you're working yourself to collapse. We're in this together now, Ryan. That means finding solutions that work for our family, not just our bank account." They created a plan together that morning. Realistic, challenging, but built on shared sacrifice rather than solitary struggle. Natalie would continue working until closer to her due date. They would move to a less expensive apartment when their lease ended. Ryan would pursue the restaurant management position full-time, rather than splitting his energy between 2 physically demanding jobs. Most importantly, they promised each other complete honesty moving forward, no matter how difficult the truth might be to share or hear. 2 weeks later, Ryan returned home from his final interview at the restaurant, his expression unreadable as he entered their living room where Natalie sat folding baby clothes. "Well," she asked, setting aside a tiny onesie, "what did Sarah say?" Ryan's serious expression suddenly cracked, a smile breaking through like sunshine after rain. "I got it. Full benefits, 5 days a week, salary that's almost 2/3 of what I made before. Not ideal, but enough," Natalie finished for him, crossing the room to embrace him. More than enough. That night, as they celebrated with sparkling cider and takeout from their favorite restaurant, a splurge they had agreed was warranted for the occasion. Ryan's phone rang. He checked the screen, his brow furrowing at the unfamiliar number. "Ryan Adams," he answered, professional habits reasserting themselves. Natalie watched as her husband's expression transformed from polite interest to shocked disbelief. He sat down heavily on their sofa, free hand gripping his knee so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Yes, I understand," he said, after several minutes of intent listening. "Tomorrow at 10. I'll be there. Thank you for calling." When he ended the call, he stared at the phone in his hand, as if it might disappear. "Ryan," Natalie prompted, concern rising. "What is it?" "That was Caroline Winters, the compliance officer at my old firm," he said, his voice distant with shock. "They've discovered evidence clearing me of all fraud allegations." Harrington confessed when they confronted him with what they found. Natalie sat beside him, taking his trembling hand in hers. "That's wonderful news. Your reputation—" "They want me back," Ryan interrupted, finally looking at her. "Not just back. They're offering me Harrington's position. Senior investment advisor with a direct path to partnership. Triple my old salary, Nat. Triple." The implications washed over them both. Financial security beyond what they had imagined possible. The life they had planned for their child. The home with a backyard, college fund, family vacations, suddenly within reach again. "When do they want you to start?" Natalie asked, practical even in the midst of this unexpected miracle. "That's the thing," Ryan said, squeezing her hand. "They wanted me to start immediately, but I told them I needed to discuss it with my wife first, that any decision affecting our family would be made together." Tears sprang to Natalie's eyes, not from the news of the job offer, extraordinary as it was, but from the fundamental shift his words represented. This was the partnership she had married into, the mutual respect and consideration that had been temporarily lost in the chaos of recent months. "What about the restaurant?" she asked. "You gave Sarah your word." Ryan nodded, the conflict evident in his expression. "I know. I thought about that too. I could call her, explain the situation." He trailed off, shaking his head. "But that doesn't feel right, does it? She took a chance on me when I needed it most." In that moment, watching her husband wrestle with competing obligations, financial opportunity versus personal integrity, Natalie felt a surge of love so powerful it took her breath away. This was the man she had married. This was the father her child would know. "Tell Caroline you'll need 2 weeks before starting," Natalie suggested, a solution forming. "Honor your commitment to Sarah. Give her time to find a replacement. The firm will wait if they really want you." Ryan's expression cleared, relief and gratitude shining in his eyes. "Have I told you lately that you're the smartest person I know?" "Not nearly often enough," she teased, leaning against his shoulder. 3 weeks later, Ryan walked into the offices of the investment firm, not as a disgraced former employee, but as a senior advisor whose innocence had been publicly acknowledged. Colleagues who had avoided eye contact during his final days now greeted him warmly. His new office, spacious, with a view of the city skyline, bore a small plaque with his name and title. But the most meaningful change wasn't the prestigious title or the impressive salary. It was the photo he placed on his desk that first morning. Natalie, at 7 months pregnant, radiant in the morning light of their new apartment. They had decided to delay buying a house despite the dramatic improvement in their finances, choosing instead to rebuild their savings and adjust to life with a newborn before making such a significant commitment. Each morning before leaving for work, Ryan would place his hand on Natalie's growing belly, talking softly to their child about the day ahead. The business suits had returned, but now they represented a choice rather than a deception. Each evening, he returned home and immediately changed into comfortable clothes, symbolically shedding the professional role and stepping fully into his identity as husband and soon-to-be father. The construction calluses on his hands gradually softened, but Ryan spoke often of the lessons he had learned during those difficult weeks. The value of physical labor, the camaraderie among men who worked with their hands, the humility of starting over in a field where his prestigious education meant nothing compared to practical skill. 1 month before their baby was due, Ryan received an unexpected package at the office. Inside was a hard hat signed by his former construction colleagues with a note from the foreman. For your kid's first building project, once part of the crew, always part of the crew. Ryan displayed the hard hat prominently in the nursery they had prepared, a reminder of the journey that had nearly broken them, but ultimately strengthened the foundation of their marriage. When Natalie went into labor on a crisp October morning, the sun was just beginning to rise over the city. Ryan drove her to the hospital with calm efficiency, his hand steady in hers through each early contraction. Throughout the 16 hours that followed, he never left her side, his unwavering support a testament to the man he had become. Not despite their challenges, but because of them. Emily Adams entered the world at 11:17 at night, her lusty cry filling the delivery room as her tiny body was placed on Natalie's chest. Ryan's eyes filled with tears as he counted perfect fingers and toes, as he stroked the downy hair that covered his daughter's head. "She's beautiful," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "just like her mother." Natalie looked up at her husband, exhausted but radiant. "She has your eyes." As Ryan held his daughter for the first time, cradling her tiny form with hands that had carried construction materials and signed investment documents, hands that had once concealed truth but now embraced it, he made a silent promise. This child would grow up knowing that real strength came not from pretending to be perfect, but from the courage to be vulnerable. Not from facing challenges alone, but from trusting others enough to share your burdens. 1 year later, on Emily's first birthday, Ryan and Natalie sat on a blanket in the park near their new home, a modest house with the backyard they had dreamed of, purchased with careful planning rather than stretched finances. Emily toddled between them, her steps still unsteady, but her determination unwavering as she explored her expanding world. As the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves above them, casting dappled shadows across their picnic, Ryan reached for Natalie's hand. "Do you ever think about where we'd be if I hadn't lost that job?" he asked, watching Emily inspect a dandelion with intense concentration. "If Harrington hadn't framed me?" Natalie considered the question, her gaze moving from their daughter to the man beside her. "We'd probably have more money in the bank," she acknowledged. "Maybe a bigger house, fancier cars. But we might not have learned what matters most." She squeezed his hand. "We might not have discovered how strong we could be together." Ryan nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The crisis that had nearly shattered their marriage had instead revealed its true strength, like gold, tested in fire, emerging more precious than before. As Emily abandoned her dandelion investigation and toddled back toward them, arms outstretched and face alight with joy, Ryan scooped her up, lifting her high above his head as she squealed with delight. In that perfect moment, with his daughter's laughter filling the air and his wife's loving gaze upon them both, Ryan knew with absolute certainty that no corner office, no prestigious title, no financial success could ever compare to the wealth he had found in nearly losing everything. That night, after Emily had been tucked into her crib, Ryan and Natalie stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching their daughter sleep. The hard hat from his construction days sat on a shelf alongside the senior advisor plaque his colleagues had given him. dual symbols of a journey neither of them would have chosen, but both now treasured. "She'll never remember any of this," Natalie whispered, leaning against Ryan's shoulder. "The struggles, the fear, the uncertainty." "No," Ryan agreed, his arm tightening around her waist. "But we will. And someday, when she's old enough to understand, we'll tell her the story of how her father once thought he had to be perfect to be loved, and how her mother discovered that love isn't about perfection at all," Natalie continued, turning in his arms to face him. "It's about showing up, day after day, through the hardest moments and the sweetest ones." As Ryan lowered his lips to hers in the soft light of their sleeping daughter's room, he marveled at how the worst crisis of his life had ultimately led him to his greatest treasure. Not just a family, but the profound understanding that true strength isn't found in facing life's challenges alone, but in the courage to share them with those who love you enough to help carry the weight. And in that understanding, they had found something far more valuable than the life they had originally planned. They had discovered the extraordinary power of ordinary love, tested by fire, and emerged unbreakable. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.